How's it going, everyone? This is Kevin. Today I want to bring along with me to talk about what would it take for me, a Sony user, to change to any new brand. So let's jump right into it. With the new cameras being announced left and right, with the Canons, you know, the R8s, and then the ZV-E1 with the Sony, and then the S5 Mark II and the X, what would it take for me, a Sony user, to change into a different brand? For example, I love seeing the new cameras that Sony comes with, and they're just phenomenal with specs and they're great. My biggest issue with Sony is that they really don't like to update and upkeep any of their cameras with firmware updates or anything like that. They just literally come out with a new version of some sort that will take over the other camera with having the better specs. Perfect example, look at the A1. I don't even think in the Sony line of the A1 has had like a firmware update. At least nobody talks about it. My Sony A7S III doesn't really get any updates. My Sony A7 IV doesn't get any updates. And now we have a ZV-E1 that has all this AI built into it, but the Sony A7R5 has some sort of AI into it, but maybe it's not the best like the other one. And it just kind of goes back and forth, which got me thinking, and I've been asked before, is why don't I shoot with anything else, or what would it take for me to shoot with anything else? So firstly, I want to talk about my biggest contenders of camera brands that I would consider switching to if I didn't shoot with Sony. That would be Lumix, the Fuji, and Canon. Sorry, Nikon. No hate against Nikon, it's just not for me. Like, I really have no desire because I don't really see any of the lenses that I would like or anything like that, but they're great cameras still, just not for me. Sorry. So I first want to talk about the Lumix because I think that's probably the more higher contender that I would go with over the other ones because of the full frame action that they have, a decent good lens selection, and the specs for the bang for your buck. You have the camera coming in at about $2,000 depending which version you go with, which you get 6K with that camera body and open gate and everything, which the Sony lines don't even have open gate, which would be phenomenal because if you're shooting horizontal and vertical, you can do it with just that one setup rather than having to just crop in too much, and it just doesn't always look the best. I still have to do it that way because I always shoot for YouTube, but then I want to do shorts with it, so I have to do with what I can with my Sony A7 IV. Since theoretically my Sony A7 IV or even my Sony A7S III, I mean technically more the A7 IV because it has a 7.2K they shoot it at, but then it condenses down to 4K. That's why it makes it so much nicer and cleaner, blah, blah, blah. I mean, they could probably do a firmware update to let you just have access to a little bit of that open gate to, you know, have more access to what you want to do with the video. The coolest thing about Lumix is they consistently put out firmware updates and listen to their customer base about things that they want to be updated via firmware, because obviously you can't just add random specs to the camera. Let's say, oh, I wanted to track like my body like AI would if it doesn't have the chip for it, but at least they listen to their customer base more than Sony, because I swear I hear people talk about Sony all the time to update their firmware, despite of being awesome cameras, and I love them. That's just a kind of drawback when it comes down to having a camera brand that listens to its consumers, which, to be honest, Sony is truly lacking, and Lumix has, I mean, a better rating in my eyes from what I see from people. So that's something that's very enticing that I would want to switch over. You have great lenses, the price point, and customer service, which is what you would want from somebody that you're spending so much money on. Next, I would pick Fuji. Why? Well, because to be honest, their color science and their Fujifilm recipes and also their video cameras are pretty great for the money. You also have that APS-C sensor, which you know you're not going to be overspending on lenses as you would with a full frame lineup of cameras. You also get some third-party lenses that you can have. Plus, you have a nice form factor if you want to have smaller cameras to kind of bring around with you to be able to shoot whatever you want and not worry about the quality, because for this little camera, you have really great photos, which it's kind of cool because you can just take it anywhere. And obviously they're more high-end cameras, whether it's for videos that shoot like 8K or anything like that, is pretty great because you're still having a great price point for those cameras that you can get a great camera overall for photos and video. And to be honest, Fuji line cameras have improved so much in their video aspects. You just get a lot bang for your buck in that aspect. I'm not the biggest fan of the APS-C sensor because of low lights and everything like that, but I'm still considering that I would go with that better than, you know, Canon even, which we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, let's get into Canon real quick as a last option that I would choose to go with as my contender to switch from Sony if I were to choose to switch from Sony. Right off the bat, Canon has great cameras, colors, everything. Obviously their top of the line lenses are phenomenal and people don't hate on them. What people hate on is how expensive it all is. So that's one of the reasons why I would kind of wait to go for that one versus the Lumix or the Fuji. Because to me, having to spend so much money on gear is not really my most exciting thing to do, because I like to have gear that works efficiently but within a price range so I can get the most out of my profit margin whenever I'm out shooting. In case I break a camera or anything like that, I'm not having to scramble to find extra cash now to replace it because of the type of gear that I like to use for the things that I do. What sucks about the Canon cameras is there's not really a third-party lens system for their newer line of cameras, which kind of sucks. So that's the scary part if I wanted to, go into their lineup. But obviously their top of the line genuine Canon lens and cameras are phenomenal. They have great everything, so that is a good reason to go and switch over to them. But what would it take for me to switch over to them? Now that's going to be a different story. Now, what would it take for me to really switch over to any of these cameras? Well, it's pretty simple. Having to see once my gear breaks down to know what is out there from Sony if it makes sense monetarily. Because right now, looking at the Lumix S5 Mark II and the X, they're great for bang for your buck with the specs ratio. So I'm assuming anything coming after that of their updated cameras with their better autofocus and everything is going to just become better. So Sony is going to have to really justify the price point for what they're bringing to the table with the specs versus that kind of camera company. Obviously, Fuji, I would consider it if I wanted to ever condense down more to have a smaller setup, because maybe I'm traveling more, or maybe I just need something just smaller because I'm using more gimbals or anything like that and it's getting tiring to use a bigger setup for the gimbals, then I would consider doing that as well. And to be honest, Canon, I don't have any justifiable reason of why I would switch over other than the fact that somehow I just really wanted to spend that kind of money for no reason whatsoever, because I don't see anything valuable that I couldn't get with the other brands or with my current lineup already. So hopefully that helps you out. But if I would consider this, that I had to start fresh from nothing and I didn't have anything, the biggest enticing thing for a full frame camera lineup of lenses and bodies would be the Lumix as my second choice in a sense over my Sony line. If I didn't have anything, I didn't have Sony any lenses whatsoever, I would probably consider going with Lumix first because of what you get from the price point and how really good they are with their customer service. That really makes me happy to want to invest into a lineup, because they'll be listening to the consumer to bring out the best product. Especially if somehow Lumix gets some lenses like the Tamron 20-40 or the 35-150 would be a consideration for me. I've heard that even with the converter that you can do it for, like let's say Sony E-mount to the Lumix, you get really good autofocus still. So hey, who knows, maybe if Sony isn't doing so well, I can just adapt those lenses to a Lumix body and call it a day and go that route. Because at the end of the day, shooting 6K, not so much because I want to have that 6K, but be able to crop in for certain things that I want to do, especially for social media with the open gate, being able to do the horizontal and vertical is something that I would value a lot, especially for clientele, since a lot of people really want that as well. It doesn't hurt to have that option. But ultimately, it all comes down to that once I need to update my cameras, whether it's because the bodies are just not holding up or whatever it is, I would really consider going maybe more to the Lumix side because of the price point, unless Sony brings out a curveball and really surprises people with bringing more bang for your buck in the specs department and everything, like how Lumix has been doing, and giving you more, options and listen to their customers more. So it's going to be a very interesting thing when it comes down to the future of cameras and what to do. But this is my thought process as a Sony user to see what it would take for me to switch over to a different camera brand when it comes down to upgrading or anything like that. So hopefully my insight helps you out in case you're wondering which camera brand to go with. But that's pretty much how I view it when it comes down to this camera setup of mine that I currently have to try to maybe change, or what would make me switch. But with all that said and done, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe, share this video with a friend. I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.